Okay, so we just finished the first exercise, which on necessary assumption issues on these questions. Page number on the left, question number on the right, and let's see what happened. So our first one here, which is 128, number 1. Now, again, what you're doing is just you're nailing down issue by issue how you have to approach the test, right? So this is nailing down the necessary, not the sufficient, right, but the necessary assumption issue. Okay. So when I look at question number 1, and they say the pundit's argument requires the assumption that, and here's how my mind would take it apart, which is, again, you're using IRAC, so now I'm reading this because I want to affirm the conclusion. Every assumption, right, you want to get to the conclusion and say, yes, that's my friend. I want to make sure that that conclusion is supported. Here we go. Pundit says, our city made a mistake when it sold the private company the rights to assess and collect parking fees. Stop. Doesn't that sound like a conclusion?
Yes.
But you need to read for that, right? Because when you say it's a mistake, don't you have to explain why it's a mistake? Okay, so now our position was, it is a mistake that the city did this. Now here come the facts, right? The private company raised parking fees and so has been able to reap profits far greater than what it paid for the rights to assess and collect the fees. Stop. So the nature of the mistake is there was profit to be made, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the profit to be made was done by raising the parking fees. Okay, got it. That's your reasoning. If the city had not sold the rights, then that money would have gone to the city. Got it. So isn't it fair to say what's assumed in this argument is that if the city had maintained the rights, the city would have been able to raise the rates?
Right, yeah.
And that's the answer. So I don't know what words you're going to use, but all this is done without consulting the answers. So does that make sense? Talk to me. Can you guys come to that?
Yeah.
Because this is a level 1 or 2. This is not a 4 or a 5. You right? It's designed for you to get it right in a hurry, and get out of there. And it can only be one credited answer. So now I'm just looking for what my mind produced. Okay, A, other private companies would have been willing to pay for the rights to assess and collect the parking fees. Does anybody like A? B, the city could have raised parking fees had it not sold the rights. How about D? Talk to me. So that's the answer. I'm picking it. I'm not looking at C, D, or E, and I'm out of here. Now, I want you, if you did pick C, D, or E, talk to me, and let's make sure that you get, again, it's technique. Identify the issue, you read the law textually, you're performing the analysis that the issue is dictating you to perform, right? You're coming up with something. Now, if it's a level 4 or 5, you're not going to come up with something real clear in your mind. Generally, you may from time to time, right? But do you get when it's a 1 or 2? Mm-hmm. You will come up with something clear in your mind, and that's where you pick up time. Does anybody want to go over C, D, or E? I'm happy to do it. You got to talk to me, though.
It's logical once you made it. It's funny, once you speak it out loud, it's logical. But it's hard not to put your own, and I know you're not supposed to do this, but to draw your own inference into it.
Right, it's not, and again, for me, that's not at all hard. And it's a psychometric test, meaning what you want to do is just say, this is all you gave me. That's all you gave me. I can wish for more, I can want more, I can feel more, that this is all you gave me.
And based on that, nothing else.
Yeah, and it's practice, it's just practice. What did you pick?
I picked D. I should pick D because it could raise parking fees, but there's other factors to consider, and that's me drawing other conclusions into it.
So, Viola, you said D for Drusus?
D for Drusus.
Okay.
Parking fees is not the only factor.
But let's look at, insofar that you can find techniques used by the writer to draw in a reader who's not reading this way. Let's see if there's anything in D that appears in other choices that may not be credited in the future. And what D says here is the revenue from parking fees is not the only factor that cities need to consider in setting the rates for parking fees. Well, okay.
That would go against the conclusion and saying
Yeah.
that the city made a mistake.
It doesn't really help the conclusion, that's for sure. But who, you know, I would never have read D. But if I read D, I would say, well, that's an inference.
It's inference.
Right, and who cares?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's where I made my mistake, that's what I'm saying.
Right, but an inference can be an assumption, right? In other words, an inference, by its definition, an inference can be an assumption because it's not specifically stated, right? But this inference is simply not necessary to support the conclusion's validity, which is the city made a mistake. This
Right.
does not explain to me.
Why?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I had read D, oh, I'm sorry, I had read D also, and I thought it just kind of confused the whole thing, and since it's a level, it's a number one, I went back to my gut response, which was D.
To be, yeah, and then what I'm encouraging.
Because D just confuses the whole thing.
But again, everybody's got to find their own way, right? But what I want to encourage you to do is, again, the grand plan here is everybody okay with what I'm claiming is as a fact that every question on test has a level of difficulty from 1 through 5. Everybody accept that as a fact?
Yes.
Okay. So based on that fact, your plans develop from the facts you have, right? So doesn't it make sense that if you have 20 questions which are level 1 and 20 questions which are level 4 or 5, doesn't it make some sense that the level 1s might be questions you can answer in less time with a higher percent of getting things right?
Yes.
Yes.
Then that's what you're seeking to achieve, right? And so for me, I never would have been a D, an assumption there can only be one answer, right? So we're not talking about what most strengthens an argument, where there can be 5 answers, because 5 answers could theoretically strengthen an argument, right? Assumptions can only be one. You practice, the psychometric stuff is having the personality that says, I'm not trying to be perfect, I'm prepared, they're going to give me nothing new on this test, and I'm a lawyer, I just haven't got my license yet, but I'm a lawyer. So, okay.
Wait, I have a
You what?
thing to say. So I chose B, but I definitely considered E. And what made me not pick E was because it uses deductive language, which would mean it's more sufficient.
Okay, so you're directing me to answer choice E as in Euphrates. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And E in Euphrates is this a statement that must be true for the conclusion to be valid? And the conclusion is it was a mistake for the city not to keep this. It should never have sold us. Okay. And the reasoning, the very specific reasoning we're given is that you can't just say don't sell it, right? You have to then come up with reasoning. So the reasoning here is don't sell it because what are you, stupid?
Gonna raise the bar.
The private company bought it and they raised rates. Okay, but then for that to be valid, it must be the case the city could raise rates. And E says, private companies assess and collect parking fees more efficiently than cities do. Well, that's almost certainly true, meaning if we apply the real world, but this is not a real world test. That private companies assess and collect parking fees more efficiently, that wouldn't preclude the city from making money. Does this argument say the city has to make as much money as a private company made?
No.
No. Does this argument say it was a mistake because the private company raised fees and they made a profit on it? So does it follow that you have to make the very same profit? What if you just made a lesser profit than the private company? Wouldn't that be okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's, I think, what
Yeah.
distinguishes E. But again, I never would have been on E. So think about when you read C, D, and E, and you begin to analyze, like you got all the way down to E, Jocelyn, right? And now you're reading E, how much time ticked off? And you need to do that if you're not sure. If it's not clear, then of course I would encourage you to do that. There's a price to be paid for continuing to doubt yourself. When you got the B, did you think that was the answer?
Yeah.
Yes.
I chose B, but I was like, I wanted to be like 100%
No,
sure.
no, you can't be 100%. You can't. You're in college. You're no longer in college. No.
I
Sucks.
chose, E was an attractive answer also, but I chose B because it provided the most appropriate assumption based on what was there. So I ruled out the other ones because they didn't seem relative to the language in the passage.
And I'm fine with all that except the phrase, the most relevant assumption. There's only one assumption, right? The other four choices do not present assumptions, right? And again, the assumption is a statement that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. And if it's false, it obliterates the conclusion. So every time you're presented with an assumption issue, there can only be one answer because it's going to obliterate the conclusion if it's false, right? And it's gotta be there for the conclusion to be valid. So it's not a question of this is a more attractive assumption than the other four choices. It is the only assumption. The other four choices represent inferences, which are not required for the conclusion's validity. This stuff is right out of law school. It's really it's a pretty cool test. Okay, good, and that's great to have that kind of dialogue, and that's great. Take a look at number 3. Which one of the following is an assumption on which the critics' argument are? So by doing necessary assumption after necessary assumption after necessary assumption, you get it's preparing you for the necessary assumptions on your test. Okay, now my mind is set. I know what I'm looking for. What do I have here? Rock music is musically bankrupt, socially destructive. But at least the album covers of rock LPs from the 60s and the 70s often featured innovative visual art. So I stopped and I processed that. Okay, you're telling me it's musically bankrupt from a specific era, and you're also telling me it had one saving feature, which is innovative visual art. I got it. Next statement. But now, since the success of digital music has almost ended the production of LPs, rock music has nothing going for it. So having read the whole thing, the conclusion is that final clause that rock music has nothing going for it. Everybody okay with that? And that's what this is all designed to show me. Rock music has nothing going for it. And so I'm supporting the proposition rock music has nothing going for it. But in the first sentence, didn't rock music have something going for it?
Yes.
And what did it have going for it?
Album covers.
Yeah, innovative visual art, right? Now, is there anything in the second sentence that brings my attention to innovative visual art? Is there anything in that second sentence that tells me whether innovative visual art is available or unavailable?
No.
It's silent, isn't it? It's silent. So if it's silent, it's not stated. Doesn't it have to be true for rock music to have nothing going for it that digital music is not accompanied by visual innovative art?
Yes.
Because if it were accompanied by visual innovative art, it would have what?
Something for it.
Something going for it. Capiche? Okay, I'm done. Now that is what I want you to practice. It's not going to happen overnight. But where's Aristotle? Okay. A. Digital music is not distributed with accompanied innovative visual art. Does that statement have to be true for this to be valid?
Yes.
You bet it does. Because it's got nothing going for it. Right? And if it had innovative visual art, what would it have? Something going for it. Do you guys see it? Talk to me.
Yes.
Okay. Now you see, everybody's getting why A is the answer, right? It doesn't really matter what you chose. Whether you chose, well, it matters if you chose A, right? But if you chose B, C, D, or E, do you get not only that A is the credited answer, but understand why it's the credited answer. And the analysis we're doing in question 3 is essentially identical to the analysis we're doing on question number 1. Right? Because you're going to say, well, it was a mistake because they can raise rates. Well, didn't you assume when you said that the other party would also be able to raise rates? Talk to me. This is not that, and again, these are low numbered, right? So this is low-lying fruit. Now, did anybody pick B, C, D, or E and not now understand why it's wrong?
I need clarification on C.
I'm sorry?
I picked C.
C for Caligula?
Yes.
What's
Only
You know, he got a bad rap. I mean, there is some evidence out there he got a bad rap. You know, again, people have a view of Caligula, right? But if I were to say, show me your case, what are you actually going to show me? Oh, well, so I read. Who'd you read? Suetonius? He's been dead for almost 2,000 years. So you're telling me you're going to read some guy who's been dead for 2,000 years that I cannot cross-examine, right? Who wrote all this stuff about myths, but you're going to rely on Suetonius. Oh. I kind of think there's a lot you don't know about Caligula, right?
Absolutely.
There you go. Law is fun. Again, just think about it to me, right? This process of inquiry is really fun, and it's really important.
So you're saying that the statement that says innovative visual art, that's not a good thing?
I'm saying the first fact I was given, as I understood that first fact, Lamar, I understood that first fact to be that you could throw rock music out the window, right? But for its innovative visual art, which I can still remember on Magical Mystery Tour, the album, right? You can see this innovative visual art. And so that first fact is, at least it had that. It had an attribute, right? But the second fact informs me that there's now this digital art, which is the digital album is replacing the LP, right? And then the conclusion is, now it's silent to the fact. The fact is the digital stuff is replacing the LP. That's the fact. You didn't say anything about the innovative art, right? And then you said, so now it really has no value at all. Okay. So when that, which is the conclusion, which is rock music has nothing going for it, well then it must be the case that when you purchase the digital stuff, it can't have innovative visual art. Because if it had innovative visual art, it would have at least something going for it.
Oh, okay.
I like that.
Okay.
I saw
Okay.
there was a flicker up there.
Well, that's definitely not a 1 or 2.
Well, we don't know. But again, Lamar, if it is a 1 or a 2, right, that is to the representative test taker. On any given question, what is assigned a 1 or 2 may be a 4 or 5 for you. And what may be a 4 or 5 may be a 1 or 2 for you. We don't have a collective mind, thankfully, right? But again, I don't care where you were, I care where you are, you see. Okay, and then Silas, going back to C says, well, how about in the 60s and 70s, only rock LPs featured innovative album cover art. Well, again, my response is, who cares? The conclusion, so you got to get the conclusion, right? You're on a different farm, man, you know what I mean? You know, the conclusion here, right, which is what you have to affirm in every assumption issue, is simply rock music has nothing going for it. That's the conclusion, right? But that conclusion is following a statement about digital stuff, digital rock music. So it's not relevant whether what LPs had it and what LPs didn't have it, so long as some LPs did have it, it wasn't totally without value. Yes? And again, if you're struggling with this stuff, have I mentioned There's a test in February, March, April, and June, all of which will get you in law school in August. Right? You gotta want it. Okay, now I'm gonna hop ahead here to page 144, question number 2. All right, and here we have which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument. So again, the issue is always presented the same way. I got it. Let me read it now. Necessary assumption. While sales of other highly fuel-efficient automobiles are in decline, sales of hydros are rising. Stop. That's a fact, right? Haven't I just been given a fact?
Yes.
And the fact is saying, for some reason, these hydros are selling more effectively than other class of things, high efficiently fueled car, right? So that's where they're directing me. Okay. Next sentence. The hydros manufacturers attribute its success to the hydros price and very low fuel consumption. Stop. Yet another fact. So I have this second fact, which is the manufacturer is saying, we believe the sales are being generated by its low price and by its fuel consumption, low fuel consumption. Next sentence. However, so the third fact is going to create some distance. However, the hydro is comparable in price and fuel efficiency to its competitors. So that seems to refute the second fact. So it is more likely that its success is due to the fact that people want to appear environmentally conscious to their neighbors. So that's the conclusion, right? So the conclusion is the hydro is probably successful because, I bought that hydro, and what Peter wanted is I wanted you, which I actually probably wouldn't in real life, but I wanted you to perceive of me as being environmentally conscious, which I'm not. Right? I'm going to be dead, so screw you all. Right?
You have grandchildren, I know. Go ahead.
I am fossil fuel. I mean, at 65, what else can you be? But just stop and think about it, right? It's like, okay, so the conclusion here is I want to appear environmentally conscious, right? And therefore I'm buying the hydro. So I'm trying to think, what have I assumed here? Well, I've assumed that the hydro will project an image, since I want to be perceived to be as environmentally conscious. It seems to me I want you to view the hydro as environmentally conscious, as a car that is representing that ilk. Yes?
Yes.
Because all we were told is the manufacturer thinks it's the low price and the fuel economy. Right? But the final fact is we don't think it's that. What we really think it is, it's not really that. It's that there's a desire to appear environmentally friendly, right? So if I want to appear environmentally friendly, don't I want you to perceive that car to be the type of car owned by someone who's environmentally friendly? Yeah, talk to me.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see what we came up with. And again, everything here is you want to reinput, you want a fact, right? That validates the conclusion that I purchased it to appear environmentally friendly. Do not lose the conclusion. A, the hydro is the most popular, highly fuel efficient automobile available. No. B, the hydro is recognizable as environmentally friendly in a way that its competitors are not.
Yes.
Sign me up. You guys see it? Talk to me.
Yes.
But you got to break it down. You with me? If you break this down the way I would break down a homicide before I went to court on it, you will go to law school. If that's not in you, I just don't think you're going to be happy. but you gotta walk the walk, and it's hard, and it's, time consuming, and yeah, you wanna be lawyers. So does that make sense? And I'll be happy to go over any other choice, but as I break that down, you give me a fact. The first fact is sales are going up, right? Then you give me a second fact, and the manufacturer seeks to give me an explanation. And it's low price and fuel efficiency. But then there's a contrary fact, right? Which is the other prices or other cars in this category have similar prices and they have similar fuel efficiency, which effectively rebuts the second fact, yes?
Yeah.
So now we're back to the beginning. And now you say to me, as a result of that, so it is more likely that its success is due to people wanting to appear environmentally conscious. That's the conclusion, that I want to appear environmentally conscious. So even if you had just stopped there and just fully understood the argument, doesn't the answer choice have to implicate a desire to be environmentally conscious?
Yes.
So any answer choice that doesn't do that cannot be the answer. Yes?
Yes.
But it's locking in on the argument's conclusion when you're working on assumptions. So are we okay on that, or does anybody pick anything else they want me to go over? Do you see it? Okay. Now we go to page 177, number 5. All right. Which one following is an assumption required by the political sciences argument? Okay, here we go. Political sciences. Some analysts point to the government's acceptance of the recent protest rally as proof that the government supports freedom of popular expression. Now stop. I got it. So there was a rally outside, right? The government allowed the rally to take place. I got it. And then some people say, you see, the government is okay with the freedom to express freedom of popular expression. I got it. But the government supports no such thing. What part of the argument is that? Is that a fact or a conclusion? Conclusion. Just stop. We say, okay, well, wait a minute. That fact you gave me in the first statement is now refuted by the argument's conclusion that that's not what's going on. Everybody get that? Isn't it the case that whatever's going to follow now has to be evidence designed to support the argument's conclusion that that first sentence means no such thing? That's not what was going on. Okay, so again, I have a first sentence that says there's a protest out there, and that's proof that the government supports freedom of expression, right? Second sentence is the conclusion and says you're wrong. Now comes the explanation. So I'm now on the it does not. That rally is not evidence of the government supporting popular expression. That's my position. Here's the reasoning. Supporting freedom of popular expression means accepting the expression of ideas that the government opposes, as well as the expression of ideas that the government supports. Stop. So the third sentence is giving me my definition, which must be true. So the definition is, if you're going to talk about freedom of expression, would it be fair to say those protesters have to be free to say what you disagree with, as well as free to say what you agree with?
Yes.
And now I fully understand that third sentence. Okay. Final sentence. The message of the message of the protest rally was one that the government entirely supports. I got it. Government supported it. My conclusion is that rally does not represent evidence that the government will support popular expression. So for that conclusion to be valid, that was fine for that rally to take place, right? But what happens if a counter group came and challenged what that group just said, and they wanted to have a rally? Then they would be opposing the government, yes?
Right.
So doesn't this argument assume that if that were a counter-protest, right, the government would not allow it to take place.
Right.
The government would oppose it. If that counter-protest was contrary to what the government said, then for this argument to be valid, the government would have to be in a position of not supporting freedom of expression in that protest. Talk to me, you get it, or no, talk to me. You're not telling me, come on.
That's what I got from the facts, but I wasn't sure if I was right.
Oh, no, and I'm not sure that I'm explaining it well. See, the thing about, again, there's a difference between like being able to get something right and then being able to explain it so that others can get it right. And that's what I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting, because I don't, But, if you're going to say to me, somebody looked at this protest and said, you see, that means the government is in favor of popular expression. Okay, I got that, right? But then somebody else comes along and says, hey, Chuckles, that ain't the way it is. Well, I got that, right? And that's my conclusion, meaning Chuckles, that's not the way it is. And then now the explanation is, you see, for the government to be okay with freedom of expression, they would have to be okay with a rally supporting the government's position and a rally opposing the government's position. That's the third sentence, right? Final sentence is, that was a rally that supported the government's position, and then what's assumed, if it was a rally opposing the government's position, the government would oppose the rally. Yes, talk to me.
Correct.
And if you could just do this at home, I'm not, okay. And all I'm doing is IRAC. Issue, now I'm reading the law, but I'm forming the contours of an answer before I'm looking, and then it becomes recognition test. Audrey.
So I got the question right, but what happened is I had to take extra time with this one because I got the conclusion, the statement which was the conclusion, wrong, because I thought initially the last sentence was the conclusion. So help me out here.
Sure. Well, the last sentence, the role in the argument of that last sentence is to add support to the position. In other words, the argument's conclusion now you have to now show that the government supports no such thing, which is followed by a third sentence, which is giving you basically a definition of what constitutes popular expression. The fourth one is just descriptive. The fourth sentence, right, that final sentence is saying, and what we observed out there was something that the government had no reason to oppose.
Okay, but when I initially read through this paragraph, so I had the first sentence as a fact, but when it said, but the government supports no such thing, I also had that as a fact, which threw me all off, and then that's why I had the last sentence as a conclusion.
Okay.
So, I mean, I had to reread it like 2 or 3 times.
Okay, and that's fine now. When it comes to test time, hopefully, but I'm saying that's natural.
But I'm not sure why I confused them.
But would you agree with me that if my second sentence is your first sentence is wrong, right? So you say you say to me, Peter, that rally out there, the government permitted it, right? So the government supports popular expression, and I say to you, the government supports, and I would say it with indignation, of course, the government supports no such thing. Wouldn't you ask me, why are you saying that? Wouldn't you ask me, haven't I challenged your position? The government supports no such thing. Didn't I just call you like a name or
I
something?
just said you're wrong, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So doesn't it follow from that, in the structure of an argument, what needs to follow is support for the position that you're mistaken. And that's the second sentence. You're mistaken, you're wrong. Now I'm going to explain why you're wrong. And I explain why you're wrong in the third sentence by giving you a definition of what supporting popular expression is and what opposing popular expression. Then I say, and that supported it. Right? So that's now given as a fact. That supported it, which is then explaining Well, we talked over here about an inference that can serve as a conclusion. So if I say here that your rally was supporting popular expression, but I have said here, right, that you have drawn the wrong, when you say to me they support popular expression, right? Right? And then I point out here, that rally you saw was pro-government. Doesn't that say you're looking for an inference that, well, had a different rally taken place opposing the government would have opposed the rally. And that is an inference which must be true for the conclusion to be valid, which is that you're wrong. So give it some thought. Not that anybody would want to see it on video, but you'll hear my lame explanation multiple times. But breaking that down is important, and again, I can't stress enough, it's so fine to be looking at it and saying, I have to keep reading it to understand the role in the argument. But that will not always be the case.
Okay.
But you don't see the second sentence as the argument's conclusion.
No, I do now, but initially I confused the second sentence and the last sentence as for conclusion and fact.
Right, but I wasn't a partner in crime initially. Yes, I can see it now, right?
I do.
That's all I can do.
But I also sort of see why I confused them too.
Well, I'm going to stick with, but you see it now.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's go to 195, question number 12.
So the right
Wait.
answer.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I not do the right answer?
No.
Oh, that's the, keep an eye on me. Jocelyn, you gotta keep an eye on me, right? Because once Vicki gets the news that I should be, maybe it's nursing home time? We have long-term health care, kicks in, she's a free woman. So now I'm reading it, right? And I say, okay, so that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the inference you want me to draw here is that if that had been a counter protest, you would have had to oppose it. A, the government helped organize the recent rally. Again, you can infer that, but it's certainly not an assumption. B, the message of the recent rally did not concern any function of the government. Oh, okay. But I'm supporting a position that government didn't support it, so that's not helping. C, the government would not have accepted a protest rally whose message is opposed. And that is just crystal clear to me, following the analysis, right? So I'm not reading D or E because it's C. I'll be happy to read. Is everybody okay with that? Okay, now, 177, number 5. I'm looking at a floor issue.
12.
I'm sorry? I'm looking at what appears to be a flaw issue. Did they put a,
No, we just went over 177 question.
195.
was there a flaw issue in there? No, so, but is 177 question number 5, is that an assumption issue?
Yes.
Okay, then, let me hang it, because what exam number is that?
That's the one we just did.
We just did it.
Get Vicki on the phone. 195, number 12.
And then I have to keep our mouth closed.
Yeah, you make your day. I mean, a hell of a way to start the new year. Okay, 195, number 12. Which one of the following is an assumption that the argument requires? Research has shown that inhaling the scent of lavender has measurable physiological effects to reduce stress. You stop, okay? It's like if this is on the exam, right? I urge you to start going like this. Right? You'll play with the people next to you. They won't know what. Well, imagine somebody sitting in front of you, right? And you go. You know that? Okay, but I get it. You know, I inhale lavender, and it has physiological effects to reduce stress. Next. It is known that intense stress, now I want you to see the difference between stress and intense stress. Capiche? Not all stress is intense. So the second sentence is introducing a change. It is known that intense stress can impair the immune system, making one more susceptible to illness. So that's intense stress, not any old stress. Therefore, it is likely that the incidence of illness among those who regularly inhale the scent of lavender is reduced by this practice. Okay, so my conclusion is it's likely that the incidence of illness, which illness came up in the first sentence or in the second sentence? Second sentence. Go back and look at that first sentence, right? See what because this is what they're doing. The first sentence is directing my attention to stress. It gives me no indication of illness, just tells me lavender, inhale it, tends to reduce stress. The second sentence builds on that, but is more specific. It talks about intense stress, making you more susceptible to what? Illness. That's quite different. All right. The conclusion is, because of what I just told you, so therefore it just means because of what I just told you, right? Because of fact 1 and fact 2, because of that, it's likely that the incidence of illness, so now doesn't illness take me back to intense stress? Therefore, it is likely that the incidence of illness among those who regularly inhale the scent of lavender is reduced by this practice. Okay. So for that to be true, doesn't it follow that at least some people who are inhaling the lavender are experiencing severe stress? Right? So again, I'm not trying to get the exact words, but it's not a really deep analysis. You gave me one, it's all predicated, that's not fair, it's mostly predicated on, do you see the difference between the information you were given in the first fact and the information you were given in the second fact? That's what they're testing, because that's what lawyers do. Okay, so now I'm just looking for whatever words they're going to use, but for that to be valid, for the conclusion here, it is likely that the incidence of illness among those who regularly inhale the scent of lavender is reduced by this practice, that it must be the case that some people who experience severe stress do what? Inhale lavender. Okay, I'm ready. A, many, if not all, of the scents that have a tendency to reduce susceptibility to illness do so at least in part by reducing stress. Well, why would I care about many, if not all? Would it be fair to say what I care about is lavender? Okay, so no. B. Some people who regularly inhale the scent of lavender would otherwise be under enough stress to impair their immune system. How about that?
Yeah.
I'm going to keep reading, but that's hitting, right? Because would it be fair to say impair is a word that appears in the second sentence, but not in the first sentence? Talk to me.
Yes.
Yeah. And that second sentence is running the show, right? You have intense stress can impair. And B is talking about some people who regularly inhale the scent of lavender would otherwise be under enough stress to impair their immune system. Doesn't that statement have to be true for this conclusion to be valid? Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I'll keep reading because I would have kept reading. Like as I read, this would not be one I'd say, but I'm quite certain. C. At least some people who use the scent of lavender to induce relaxation and reduce stress are no more susceptible to illness than average. No, that's not where we are. Is there a connection between inhaling lavender and experience intense stress, right, where the lavender gives relief. D, in anyone for whom the scent of lavender reduces susceptibility to illness, it does so primarily by reducing stress. I don't know that. Lavender may help you in any number of ways. Reducing stress would be one of the ways. Right? E, reduced stress diminishes susceptibility to illness only for people who are under enough stress to impair their immune system to at least some degree. And again, it doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be only for certain people. It can be for other people as well. It doesn't have to be only for this group. So the answer there is B. Does that make sense? Okay. 217, number 3. Which one following is an assumption required by the argument? The current sharp decline in commercial honeybee population has been attributed to the same viral and bacterial infections, pesticide poisoning, and mite infestations that devastated bees in the past. So stop. So I'm being directed to a sharp decline in commercial honeybee population, and I've been directed to what has caused that sharp decline in the past. And there are 3 things that have caused it. Well, 4, viral and bacteria being different, but one is they get viral or bacterial infections. 2 is pesticide poisoning, and the third one is mite infestation. That's what's done it in the past. Okay. So we've attributed the sharp decline to one of those 3 causes. Next sentence. So that's a fact. Whichever of these adverse conditions, now stop for a second. Would it be fair to say that each of the 3 things described in the first sentence has now been classified as things that are adverse?
Yeah.
So we can now say any one of those things, and we can use the word adverse, and the word adverse wholly incorporates those 3 things. Okay. So that's what you're reading for, because now I'm talking about adverse. Whichever of these adverse conditions is the immediate cause, it is highly likely that there is also a long ignored underlying condition, and that is inbreeding. So stop. So there's an underlying condition to these causes, right? And that is inbreeding. All right? So now there's like a 4th one, inbreeding, right? Next sentence. Decades of breeding practices meant to maximize pollinating efficiency have limited honeybees' genetic diversity. So what has inbreeding led to?
Limited genetic diversity.
Limited diversity. So now, isn't limited diversity one of the causes in addition to the original 3 causes that we have?
Yes.
Which is putting the honeybees at risk. So now, would it further be fair, so haven't I assumed here that genetic diversity can make the honeybees more vulnerable to decline?
Yes.
Yeah? Because it's not specifically stated, but it's like they could have put genetic diversity in that first sentence with the other 3 things that cause it. Yes?
Right.
Okay. So that's what I've assumed. A, commercial honeybees are more vulnerable to problems with inbreeding than wild honeybees are. And you get, I have no clue, you get there's nothing in this argument about wild honeybees. And if there's nothing in the facts, you cannot draw that inference. B, the results of decades of breeding practices cannot be quickly undone. How in God's name would I know? And what has that got to do with the argument's conclusion? C, the genetic diversity of the honeybee population continues to decline. You can infer that, you certainly can infer that, but that's not an assumption required for the argument's conclusion. D, in the past, viral infections in mites have devastated genetically diverse honeybee populations. Well, you've named two of them. You've mentioned viral infections and mites, but you haven't mentioned pesticides. So how would I know, because you say in that first sentence that the current sharp decline is attributed to one of these three things, right? And then choice D, did anybody pick D? No, okay, yeah, I mean, I think, because and I infer from that you're reading into the first sentence that when you say the sharp decline in the commercial honeybee population has been attributed to the same viral and bacterial infections as one, pesticide poisonings two, and mite infestations that devastated bees in the past, you're then adopting as an assumption that in the past viral infections and mites have devastated genetic diverse honeybee populations. Would it be fair to say there's no mention in there of pesticide poisoning? And did anybody say, we say it can be attributed to one of three things. Couldn't pesticide poisoning be responsible for 98% of this? So I like D, but it's wrong. E, lack of genetic diversity can make honeybees more vulnerable to adverse conditions, and that's what it is. Okay, they take that term, adverse conditions. Now, wouldn't it be fair to say, so Brian, would that term adverse conditions in the second sentence, doesn't that include each of the three members in the first sentence?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the distinction between D and E, right? And so if you're going to say to me that lack of genetic diversity can make honeybees more vulnerable to adverse conditions, then I got it. So, E. And we have one more. Everybody okay now? Okay, 218, number 6.
Well, can I ask one more question now on that last?
Sure, of course.
Isn't D also wrong because it refers to genetically diverse honeybee populations, which there's no mention made of genetically diverse honeybee populations in that first sentence?
Yeah, it can be for that reason, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, yep. But even if that weren't there, but yeah, because it's not established that they were genetically diverse. In
No,
fact,
it
it's
actually
established
refers to
that they were
commercial
genetically
honeybees
similar.
It refers to commercial honeybees, and the whole paragraph kind of leads you for commercial honeybees to the ingredients to the lack of genetic diversity.
Well, yeah, but that comes up in the final sentence. But that's correct. You're right. You're correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you're correct. I mean, who am I to say you're correct? We could both be wrong. But I think you're correct. I remember somebody saying to me, "You're right." Well, like you're partially right, and I'm like, who are you to tell me I'm partially right? What if you're wholly wrong? Moron. 6. Okay, political analyst's argument depends on the following. Political analyst, several years ago, McFarland, the military dictator, had Brooks, the former prime minister, arrested on charges of corruption. I got it. Okay. After years of negotiation, McFarland had pardoned Brooks, and she has agreed to join the government. Okay, not struggling with this. Almost all of McFarland's supporters believe Brooks is guilty of corruption. These are just facts. Now, is it fair to say that in this third fact, what's brought to my attention are the people who are McFarland's supporters?
Yes.
Okay, and they believe she's guilty of corruption. Next one. Moreover, almost all of McFarland's opponents will oppose anyone who agrees to join the government. Is it fair to say that the third sentence brings my attention to Farland's supporters, right? And the fourth sentence brings my attention to Farland's detractors. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. So is it fair to say we have sufficient facts to speak about those two groups?
Yes.
Okay, let's see what the conclusion says, which I infer is about to come. For this reason, that's it. For this reason, So, Brooks will have few supporters in this country. So Brooks will have few supporters in this country. So for that to be valid, that Brooks has few supporters in this country, doesn't it have to follow that in this country, you're either a supporter of McFarland or you oppose McFarland? Because couldn't it be the case there are people who do neither?
Yes.
Have there be people you don't support or oppose? Couldn't there be this third group that says, we just don't care? So do you see how the conclusion, for us to make that valid, we have to eliminate that possibility. We have to eliminate the possibility there are a bunch of people who don't care. Yes?
Yes.
So for this argument to be valid, almost all the country has to be composed of people who support McFarland or oppose McFarland. A, Brooks joining McFarland's government inappropriately gives governments a semblance of legitimacy. It's nowhere near what my mind produced. B, there is less corruption in the country's government now than when Brooks was prime minister. Why in God's name would you pick B if you had done analysis? C, Brooks' political positions do not overlap with those of McFarland's. No, and I don't care. D, most people in the country are either supporters or opponents of McFarland. That must be true for this to be valid. And E, the charges on which Brooks was arrested were unfounded. Who would care? Is it pretty clear that D is the answer?
Yes.
And is it pretty clear that that was not a real heavy lift? In terms of the analysis required of the test taker was mild, I think. Okay. So we're done with that.